So a brief history about the row ergometer, and specifically the Euro Rower Elite. We'll get to that towards the end here as to where we are in 2020, 2021. You really do want to have a good understanding. Some may think it's not really a big part to play in terms of the modality that you're choosing for exercise. But I always believed that it was really nice to know where all of those things came about, because it leads to at least the user thinking about intentions. Intentions of why they're doing what they're doing. Now, because you will know the history, it's not going to change up exactly how you approach what you're doing on the air rower, but the historical context, I believe, it always just paints the picture a whole lot better. Okay? If it's not obvious, we're on land. And if you go back in historical context and look at how we did move across land or move across water, we didn't have the technological things and industrial standards we have in front of us today to do those things. Well, let's say 10,000 years ago. So I could be off by plus or minus thousands of years, but we were on water and moving across water with how we figured out how to create buoyancy and decrease drag. And I'm sure it started off with someone watching a tree or a big log floating through water going, I wonder if we can get on top of that and move towards a certain location. And that's, I don't even know, but I'm sure that's where it started. And then next thing you know, you create efficiency in terms of seating arrangements, not getting wet, and you see where it all moves. And you actually are developing some form of boat that is going to move throughout the land. Now, with that, you're going to have, which is the most important point here to recognize, where this thing, how this came to be. First important point is that in this situation here, you have a lot of environmental factors and a real unstable environment, okay? And that's just important to know. Now, when you do on-land row ergometer, and we've moved this tremendous amount of time to put it into a machine that somewhat resembles that, you have a stable environment and not as many environmental factors, okay? So you can just envision, rowing in this gym and then me going to the River Thames and just on the land, on the land next to the river and just rowing. Sure, sunlight, it could get some rain, etc., but that's not really the environmental impact that you're going to have most times with this. So two main considerations here. We've been rowing for a really, really long period of time. But when you move to land and you put it into this mechanical environment, the major things that you're going to change, which is important to know in the historical context when you row and the intentions leading into your rowing, is that it's a very stable environment and there's not a lot of environmental demands based upon that, okay? So in the row erg itself, we pretty much, I'm not going to claim that but yeah, we humans did come up with this. We created this ergometer to mimic exactly what we were doing on water. And specifically the row erg, because if you could just imagine, we couldn't take 8 people in a boat and transition that over to a machine on land for 8 people. Just think about that for a second. That's a little tough to do, right? So what do you have to do? You put it into an individual, stable environment that one person can do the particular skill, because work can be created inside of that machinery, okay? And this is what we've come up with. We've come up with a row ergometer that somewhat mimics the movement of rowing, okay? Now the reason for this is that traditionally from the start, row individuals, people that were doing rowing specifically as a sport, and maybe in leisure activity, wanted to do land volume. So they wanted to do something that mimicked their actual sport, like a treadmill as an example, right? They wanted to do something that mimicked their sport on land when they could not get access to water or they didn't have access to water. So we created something that's as similar as possible to it. And so the land volume was one of the original intentions as to why the ergometer was made. Secondly, it was considered a different form of exercise modality. So now that it's squeaked inside of fitness and squeaked inside of exercise, you now have a modality that is similar to VersaClimber, similar to the assault bike, similar to an upright bike, similar to a VersaClimber, I'm not sure if I said that already, similar to a treadmill. You have different kinds of modalities now that the row erg can seep inside of fitness. So it's not only being used for sport people on land to develop volume, it's also being used now as part of the fitness zeitgeist as a exercise modality you can use to do cardiovascular activity, okay? And then last, only over the past, let's say 15, 20 years, it is actually now being used inside of a sport environment. So that you can actually train to be an elite erg athlete. That is possible today. So you can be a world champion specifically on the row erg. Secondly, there are sub-sports, let's call them mixed sports or multimodality sports. It's not only held to mixed modal sports, but that do use the rower, and you can't just do it as exercise to be really good at it. You actually have to specifically train that modality, the air rower, amongst everything else that it works with in order to be really good at it as in that sport setting. So the row erg has gone from this historical context to moving on land to being used for three particular areas. Land volume for the sports person, it's a new exercise modality, and now it's actually being used as a sport modality that you actually have to get really good at. And this is an interesting, just idea in order to see the proliferation, the growth, exactly how all things come to be in the usage of this modality today. In the 70s, there's argument to that. There wasn't only one, but there truly only was one. And if you're not a rowing erg advocate, just go search for that company. It's well known that what company that was. But in the 70s, there was one model, and everyone knew that that was the model, and that was the company that developed the starting point for the row ergometer. And now we're in the 2020s, and there honestly is 10 plus different versions of this. Now these come in multiple different forms, flywheel, air tension, water tension, different seat arrangements, angles, etc. But they all basically get at a similar style of movement, right? A similar style of kinematics. And this is important to recognize just so you do know that there are options out there. We're going to make a recommendation for the air rower based upon its mechanics and a number of the things it's going to offer, but there are a number of models out there just so you can see the evolution of the ergometer itself, okay? So to recap this, it's important to know the historical context of the modalities because it gives you a deeper insight into the intentions of why you're doing it, okay? Know that we went from water tens of thousands of years ago, and now we're at this, evolution basically of doing work, and we've been able to do it with technological and information advancement to the current times to be able to do it for a bunch of different things. And just know you have a lot of options out there when you do it, but we're going to make a recommendation for the air rower.